So, today I'm sharing more stories and some behind the scenes details. We might even share some writing tips. So, I've got my drink here. May have to get up in a few minutes and get that refreshed. But let's go ahead and get started. I don't know if you've ever listened to any of my stories before, but this is a continuation of a whole group of stories, hundreds of stories and articles that I've written on a platform called medium.com over the past 3 years. And I wanted to leave these in a video form so that my children and my grandchildren can enjoy them at any point in the future. They can be passed down. And I have said this before. I wish that my mother had done this. I wish that my grandmother had done this. This is just something that I really would have treasured from them. So, today we're starting with a story that, an article actually that I wrote to encourage other writers on the platform, and especially new writers, people who haven't been writing very long maybe, because it's really easy to get discouraged. And so people will tell you, and that's the name of this article, is people will tell you not to write. Don't listen to them. And so I was using the example because I found something that Sarah Moss, who is an author of several young adult fiction books, had written. And I think a quote maybe that she had made, because she hadn't, everybody has to start somewhere, right? She hadn't published anything yet. And so anyway, this was a quote that she said: "People will tell you not to write. Don't listen to them. They will tell you your writing isn't good and that you shouldn't be writing the kind of stories that are in your heart. Believe me, as a fantasy author, I've gotten that a lot. But keep writing. I only made it to publication because I kept writing. Because I wrote whenever and however I could, because I wrote what I loved." Sarah Moss is a young adult fantasy writer best known for her series A Court of Thorns and Roses. She began writing the first novel, Throne of Glass, when she was just 16. Even before that, she was writing and publishing Sailor Moon fan fiction. So, like a lot of writers, she started out at a very young age and realizing that there was a lot going on in her imagination and that she wanted to share. Okay, so my article goes on with a popular way to come up with story prompts is to ask yourself, what if? Sarah does this too. The storyline of the ACOTAR series is based on the story of Cinderella, with the premise of what if Cinderella was not a servant, but an assassin? And what if she didn't attend the ball to meet the prince, but to kill him instead? Sarah tells this story through a series of 5 novels. And of course, this article that I wrote was written in 2022. So I think she's actually written a few more of that series novels since. As of 2021, Sarah has written 3 series, sold over 12 million copies of her books, and has won multiple Best Young Adult Fantasy and Science Fiction and Best Fantasy Awards from Goodreads. She's always open to new ideas whenever they pop up. Sarah says, "I was on a plane for one of my book tours years ago, and the idea hit me out of the blue while listening to some music. At the time, I had no idea who the characters were or what their world was, but I just saw this epic emotional scene, what is now the climax of the book, play out in my head. It moved me so much that I began crying in the middle of the plane. And I knew that if I was having such an intense reaction to just a kernel of a scene, it was a story I had to write. Sarah says movie scores and classical music are her inspiration as a writer. She says the sense of discovery is why I love writing so much. It's a total thrill for me. Famous authors, though, are just ordinary people who have done extraordinary things. Sarah is also a mom with feelings like every other working mom. She says most days the things I truly struggle with are just the guilt of wanting to spend time with my son when I have to sit down and focus on a deadline. It's something I'm still figuring out, but hearing from other moms that they've struggled with the same things has been a huge help. For those of you who intend to or who are in the process of writing a novel, she talks about how much planning she does for her stories. She says, I like to know how I want each book to end and how I want the series overall to end, and some of the middle details, like the scenes that excite me, whether it's an action scene or a really sexy hot scene. When I'm filling in those gaps between those scenes I've planned out in advance, I usually wind up learning tons of little details about the characters. Sometimes just adding in a little detail can wind up opening an entire pocket of the world. It's a long process, but adding in those details is really one of my favorite parts of it. When it comes to the big reveals and all the stuff that happens in book 3, a lot of that I'll plan far in advance so that I can plant the seeds pretty early on in book 1 or 2. I grew up with Harry Potter, and I feel like J.K. Rowling in the Queen of Little Details that are on the page in book 1, and then in book 6 they come back in a huge way. That definitely left its mark on me when I was growing up as a reader and a writer. Like most writers, Sarah likes knowing that what she has written has made an impact in her readers' lives. In a YouTube interview, she tells us about one such incident. She tells about getting a handwritten letter from a woman in the U.S. Army who said she suffers from major PTSD from her Army experience and from also having an abusive relationship. Reading Sarah's book, A Court of Mist and Fury, made her realize that she needed to get help and that she wasn't alone. Sarah said the woman quoted Matilda, "Authors write books like ships they send out into the sea for readers to find." She said Sarah's book wasn't just the ship you sent out for me, it was the life raft. Sarah said that when she writes, she has created a bubble in her office, but getting letters that say what a difference her writing has made never gets old. Her top advice to any young writers: number 1, read a lot. This is probably the most obvious bit of advice, but read as much as you can. Read what your professors assign you, but also make time to read for fun. Number 2, draw your inspiration from everywhere. Take the time to observe people, how they talk, how they move, how they interact. Keep your eyes open. Number 3, be open to criticism. It's one of the hardest things to do and one of the most crucial to our profession. Learning to accept it will help your writing to improve. Number 4, pay attention in history class. You'd be surprised by how much my history classes have helped out my writing. I frequently kick myself for not paying more attention in high school and for not taking more history classes in college. And number 5, write whenever you can, however you can. No matter where I was, I always made time to write. Not because I felt like it was an obligation or requirement, but because it was something I had to do, because my stories were something I had to get out of me. So the takeaways from Sarah Moss her advice is don't let people tell you not to write. And you're never too young to start writing. Look for inspiration everywhere. Always ask, what if? And finally, keep writing. Now, one of the reasons that I wrote that article about Sarah Moss and her advice was because so many of us who start writing later in life or who start publishing later in life often hear the advice that you're too old to write. And so I was looking for authors who specifically had advice about writing even when people tell you not to. So if you've got an idea for a story, or if you just want to tell your own story, then I would encourage you to go ahead and start that story. Go ahead and either use an ink pen and a notebook, or go ahead and start writing it down online, maybe on a Word document somewhere. But go ahead and start. You can take all the notes you want to. I find that a lot of times when I'm writing, especially about something that's happened in the past, it brings a lot more details back to my mind. And so then I can write those down. And it may not be as important to you at the moment, but if you're recording things like I am for your children later on and grandchildren or family and friends of any kind to see, then those little details are important to them. You may not be around to answer any questions, so the more details that you can put in to your stories, to your writing, the better. Now let me see if I got any comments on that story, because what I enjoy doing the most when I am going back through my stories is looking at all the comments that I got from people at the time that I wrote it and then since then. Okay, so Mika says, never let others discourage us from writing. We write what we want. I think she got the point. And then Lisa says, oh, she commented on that one statement in the story, you're never too young to start writing. And she said, or too old. And I've written other stories too about people who published when they were later in life. Mark Twain is on that list. The woman who wrote Little House on the Prairie, she's on that list. There are many popular writers who didn't start until they were well into their 50s and 60s. Matt says, there are too many people trying to tell writers of all types what they need to be writing to be successful. It's gross and also remarkably false. Wonderful article. I've always been intrigued by Sarah Moss, and now you've given me reason to love her. Bravo. Mark says, thank you again for reading my articles. I try to use interesting things that have happened to me as my inspiration. And I think a lot of us do. We use events from our own life. We may take those and change them up a little bit, but we try to oftentimes find ourselves incorporating real things from our life into our stories that we write, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. And let me see. Ralph says, the question is, does the writer create the details, or have they laid in limbo since the dawn of time, waiting for someone to pull them out of nothingness? Now there's a writer. When you can take a few words and manage to make a little mystery out of it. And Jill says, an inspired voice, she's talking about Sarah, an obviously talented writer. She seems like a great role model and voice of inspiration. And Grace says, a quote I live by as a writer, To be a writer, you must do two things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. Oh, she was quoting Stephen King. Loved this article. There is just something so motivating about hearing other writers' success stories. I agree. She says, I used to find the stories so intimidating, and I always felt like I'd never get there. Now I love them. Sometimes the hardest thing is just to write something down and then click that publish button, because then, it's, of course, you can go back in and unpublish, but once you click publish, there's always that chance that somebody is going to look at your article, and they're kind of like our babies, our kids. We send them out into the world, and we don't know what people are going to tell us about them. They're good or they're bad, or be critical, or absolute trolls. And hopefully if we've done them right, like we've trained our kids right, then all we get is praise. And that's what we live for as a parent, and it's also what we live for as a writer. Okay. It's probably been a week or week and a half since the last time that I did a live. And my motivation was to record my articles and my stories from Medium. And so I kind of got out of that habit, of that routine that I was starting. And so it feels good to be able to get back in there and start reading my things again. And I know that I am missing a lot of comments because I haven't quite got this figured out. I'm trying to get a better setup for recording. So if I miss your comments when you add them, I'll try to get to them in the next day or two. Okay, let's see what I wrote after that. After that story about Sarah Moss. Okay, so the next story that I want to read is actually a piece of historical fiction that I wrote, because one of the most fascinating things to me is to, it wasn't always this way, but to read something that happened in history and to try to think of it from the viewpoint of somebody who was there that day, who would have been affected by those events. And so my next story is called One-Way Trip to Freedom Across the Atlantic. On this day in 1621, some of our ancestors in Plymouth, Massachusetts, stood watching the Mayflower sail back to England. The Mayflower had transported pilgrim families from England to what they referred to as the New World. The trip started in early September of 1620, and the plan was to land in October. Delays and other complications changed their arrival date at Cape Cod to November 21, which means they had spent 10 weeks at sea and now had to face the rough winter unprepared. If the locals hadn't taught them some survival skills, none of them would have made it. There were 53 who did survive after spending most of the winter aboard the Mayflower when the ground was too frozen to begin building shelter. Of course, the Mayflower didn't stay there. It was never meant to be a one-way trip. The ship wasn't big enough for everyone who wanted to make the trip the first time. Many of those who wanted to leave hadn't had enough time to settle their affairs, and they didn't have the funds to buy needed supplies for the trip. They were left behind to make a possible second trip. It must have been heart-wrenching to leave family and friends behind with only the hope of one day being together again. Those first passengers would have heard the stories about Jamestown and how most of its settlers died within the first year from starvation and constant attacks by indigenous people, but they believed that it was God's will and that they would prosper with his backing. They proceeded with their plans. The second ship they had bought, the Speedwell, kept springing leaks. Did it occur to anyone to rethink plans at that point? Maybe it was a sign that the trip shouldn't be undertaken. They ended up returning to England, and 20 of the Speedwell passengers joined the crowded Mayflower, leaving behind even more friends. It had been a rough trip over the ocean. September's western gales were dangerous on the Atlantic, and the ship's provisions were already lower than expected because of the delays. It must have seemed like this journey, so slow to start, would never end. Now, on April 5, men and women alike, regardless of their desire for religious freedom or other reasons for leaving England, stood on the shore and watched their ride disappear into the sunset. Since most ships would have departed in the early morning hours, the sunset was probably a long way off, and the uncertain day stretched out before them. But it was spring. Birds were singing, the sun was shining, and greenery was sprouting all around them, a promise of freedom's possibilities. Did Mrs. Hopkins stand there with her baby, Oceanus, and wonder about her new life? Did Oceanus, who was born mid-trip, have dual citizenship? Did any of the other passengers see John Howland get swept overboard in a storm and then saved when one of the crew threw him a rope? Did travelers recall crouching with their families when the ocean waves were crashing over the ship and soaking everyone? That memory alone would have made me think twice about a return trip. They were no doubt happy to be out of the ship. The living space was not easy. Below decks, any person over 5 feet tall would be unable to stand up straight. 102 people living in 1,600 square foot area. What would a trip be like this today? I think that's just a little larger than my living room, and it seems pretty crowded with just my son and myself. When one of the cats is inside, it's too much for me, and I head for my bedroom and close the door to get some private space. Back in England were ready-made homes and shops and jobs to be found. They would soon be having to provide these services for themselves here in their new home. Houses would have to be built with the materials at hand. Gardens started to provide for growing families, and so no new clothing would be had for quite some time. Was the adventure and the freedom worth it? Would any of them eventually make their way back to England? What would it have been like to stand on the shores of a new continent with doubts and fears and hopes crowding your mind? The Mayflower was not in the best shape, and 4 years after she returned, the ship was sold for scrap. Some say pieces of the ship were used to build a barn in England, but no one can say for sure. 4 centuries pass. In 2020, celebrations were planned to mark the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower's landing, but COVID-19 placed many of these plans on hold. One event I would really enjoy seeing is the Mayflower Autonomous Ship. It uses an AI captain designed by IBM. Current plans are to make the trip across the Atlantic in spring 2022. You know, I need to go back and research that and see if that was done. At the time that I wrote this, it was right about the time, it was within a month or two, I think, of when that was supposed to happen. So let me continue on with the article. Watch the docuseries. Oh, there is a docuseries. I should go watch that again. As the announcer says, this project is not about the last 400 years. It's about the next 400. It's about the future. I think the pilgrims would be impressed. And I got a few comments on that piece of historical fiction. I think the reason I called it historical fiction is because although the events were real, I think I went in on the ship's manifest and found some of the passengers' names and then created little stories or vignettes around those few characters. So Angie commented, excellent way to make the history real and fun. And I replied too that I find history is more interesting to me the older I get. Okay, Gerald says, I enjoyed the history piece, Judy. Thanks for sharing. And Jill says, this was so interesting, and to think I never enjoyed history as a young student. I think a lot of us feel the same way. It's only when we get older that we have created some history of our own that we are able to put those things that were so far in the past and don't seem related to us at all, we're able to put them in context and enjoy them more, I think. Jill said, living 102 people in 1,600 square feet feels quite uninhabitable. I imagine they were really happy to get off the ship. Maud says, how sad the Mayflower was sold for scrap. How sad the sinking or scuttling of any ship. But the Mayflower, she belongs up there in legacy with the USS Constitution, which, by the way, is the oldest commissioned ship in the United States Navy. I think about the sailors who have walked her decks. Okay. I am going to have to go back and check out that docuseries, that documentary on the project that they were working on. That would be really interesting to go see that. I'm not sure where that was at either. Oh boy, going back too far. Okay, after that story I wrote, there are no ultra-crepidarians here. One of my favorite things as a writer is finding weird or unusual words and then being able to use them in a story in some way. So ultra-crepidarian, just to save you a little trip to the dictionary, is someone who talks on and on about things that they are not an expert in. But as a writer, we all like to explore things that we aren't necessarily experts in. Books have been among my earliest companions. Starting at the age of 5, I gravitated toward books like a leech to warm bodies in the water, like a nail to a magnet, like a black hole draws in matter, but without any of the pain that those analogies suggest. Within the pages of the many books I read, I found kindred spirits, exciting adventures, new ideas, and treasure troves of knowledge. During the mid-1960s, the only place to find books if you happened to live in a rural area was a library. This was a mystical place with shushing librarians wearing horn-rimmed glasses and sporting gray buns. They were human encyclopedias, had the power to deny you a library card, and could quiet a gaggle of rowdy 10-year-old boys with a quelling glance at 100 paces. I admired and feared them, but my love for books was stronger. Apparently, I am not the only person on Medium who enjoys books. Some of my fellow mediumites have done everything from asking why read books to I read a book and this is what I think about it. And I found that, like me, their love for books is strong. And so anytime that I write an article like this, I put in little links to other writers and what they've written. And so there I added a link to, and I can't see who the author, oh, there it is. I wrote who the author was. Excuse me, just a moment. Okay. Riaz Laskar he wrote an article called Why Should I Read a Book? Everybody is reading, but nobody is becoming Elon Musk. Okay, although the author Riaz Laskar admits that his article is satirical and never actually gets around to answering the why question, still he estimates that from the age of 3, he has read more than 2,000 books during his life. He also drops names like Elon Musk and Bill Gates, but we've all done that once or twice. See what I did just then? I think the answer to why should I read a book is maybe just for fun, just for the fun of it. Did I guess right, Riaz? Another author talks about the importance of reading books. She gets very specific on how reading activates parts of the brain and how the benefits actually change your brain. If you enjoy reading about scientific stuff like neurons and neuronal connections and bilateral cortical regions, then you'll be amazed at how your reading brain works. Did you know reading reduces stress? That it helps with sleep and prevents cognitive decline? She has the study, this author that I quoted, she has the study information to show you how setting aside a half hour at some regular point in your day can give you these benefits too. Those who really love books have found themselves collecting them like my son collects cats. It's sometimes as hard to part with a book as it is a friend, which is why I have over 500 titles currently waiting for me on my Kindle app. But I digress. Another author, Paul Combs, shares his experience as a bona fide book hunter in his article, A Frustrating Return to the Friends of the Library Book Sale. Paul admits he is a book snob and how disappointed he was that his post-COVID sale turned out so poorly. He says the selection was abysmal, but that in the past he has even found first edition hardcover gems and usually leaves with at least 2 full boxes of books. He leaves fellow book hunters with a smidge of encouragement. Yet even in the darkest of book hunting times, the literary gods never totally abandon you. Just when it looked like a total bust, nestled among a raft of romances lurked 3 bibliomysteries. Bibliomysteries. They aren't The Shadow of the Wind or The 13th Tale, but they don't have to be. What I needed more than anything, and what, in spite of the dour tone of much of this piece, I want to convey to you, dear reader, is that while book hunting may be on life support in many places, it is not dead and it never will be. We just may have to dig a little deeper for the treasures. So he finished up by saying, keep the faith, happy hunting, and may Hemingway be with you. And happy hunting to you as well, Paul. How many times have you read a book and wanted to highlight a particular quote? Some of us can't stop highlighting no matter what we're reading, but if it's good stuff, you recognize it and you want to be able to locate that quote quickly again the next time you're playing Scrabble or when you're in a match of wits. Quotes have long been used among the elite as proof of their elevated education. Throw out a quote by Shakespeare at your next party and watch the eyebrows and your value lift among the partygoers. Tyler C. Newman shares some worthy quotes in his article above. Tyler gets specific by sharing not only the quote, but the book, the author, and the interpretation of 7 potent quotes. Here are 3 of my favorites. The interpretations are absolutely marvelous. Please go check them out. Quote, what a caterpillar calls the end of the world, we call a butterfly. Eckhart Tolle. Am I pronouncing that name right? Here's another quote. You have the power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. And the third quote, when you are trying to impress people with words, the more you say, the more common you appear and the less in control. Even if you are saying something banal, it will seem original if you make it vague, open-ended, and sphinx-like. Powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. The more you say, the more likely you are to say something foolish. By Robert Greene. Definitely quotes worth reading, maybe even memorizing a few. And then sometimes you try to read a book and it's just not the right fit for you. Hey, it's happened to me too. I even tried to listen to the Audible version. Nope, just couldn't do it. I felt a little bit like a failure. I love books. Why was I not able to finish this one? So was I surprised to find I was not alone. Phew, no way. It was a huge relief. The following author writes about a few books that she was unable to finish and why. And her name is Katie Churchward, and the name of the article was Books I Could Not and Did Not Finish. Katie Churchward reports feeling the urge to go ahead and complete a book even when it was terribly written or boring or dull. Yep, I've been there. She calls herself stubborn and admits she doesn't want to quit for the main reason that she's already invested so much time in the project. Then she gets specific and talks about the books that she just couldn't stomach anymore and called quits. Her own words are better than mine, but I couldn't help laughing even as I sympathized. Book review number 1. I should have thrown this book straight in the trash following the pool story. If you know, you know. However, I persevered until things started to hit the fan around halfway through, trying hard to stay as spoiler-free as possible. This is around where I acknowledge this book with its strangeness, depravity, and alarming over-the-top shock factor was never going to be for me, and promptly returned it to the library. Wow, I hated this book. Book review number 2 was a medical thriller by a very well-known writer. This book was the exact opposite of what I needed. So, for the sake of my own sanity, I put it down and have not ever returned to it. I have a book like that on the table beside my bed right now. I need to just return it to my daughter and tell her, I can't do this. I just can't do it. I know the feeling. I've started books and thought, nope, I can't handle this right now. Book review number 3. Have you ever picked up a book and have certain expectations? I have. Sometimes it pans out and sometimes it just doesn't. So this is one of her comments about the third book. I couldn't get into it. I couldn't connect to the characters. Not to compare books, but truthfully, it's how I felt when I first picked up Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in the first few chapters. Initially, Harry Potter is all Dursley's doom and gloom, but once you push through, you are rewarded with a story full of magic and wonder. This book is kind of like that. All Dursleys without a reprieve and none of the charm of Rowling's original series. Or is it Rowling? J.K. Rowling? She says it just wasn't for me. Book review number 4. Okay, I'm the first to admit self-help books on finance are not what I usually pick up for a few hours of oblivious recreation. I have occasionally thumbed through books on finance, hence the sad state of my bank account. But the author talks about her reasons for dissatisfaction. She said, I love the sneak peek it gives into other people's lives. I live for the comment section, and I want to hear what people have to say about the unique spending habits of everyone. I picked up this book excited to dive into people's stories and lives right away. Without the snark of the comment section, though, it does fall a bit flat. Watering down people's stories to shoehorn them into a particular theme or lesson, the impression you are left with while reading, made me quickly lose interest. I get what they were trying to do here, but I fell off from boredom and haven't returned to reading it. I personally found that the author's descriptions of her DNFing escapades humorous and relatable. Oh, did not finish. DNF, did not finish. This is a warm welcome to all the ultra-crepidarians out there. Speak up and share your opinions freely. And you know, that really didn't have so much to do with the word ultra-crepidarians. I just wanted to use that word. I did, and maybe that's why it didn't get read very much. Okay, what do we have next? Okay, next I think I just kind of wrote a little filler article, and that's just one you write just for the goofiness of it. I was really getting into the what happened in history on this day, and so one of the things that happened apparently on April the 6th was that Post-it notes were invented. So, of course, I had to write a short story about it. But also I remembered the scene from Romy and Michelle's high school reunion. Was that the name of that movie? And they talk about trying to impress people at the reunion by claiming to have invented Post-it notes. So that was the name of my article. Did Romy or Michelle invent Post-it notes? And actually, it wasn't either one of them. On this day in history, April 6, 1980, Post-it notes became available in stores in the United States. It's hard to imagine a time when the little sticky squares were not a normal part of our lives. I'm looking at my little pad of orange sticky notes on my desk and wondering what I'd do without them. Probably waste large pieces of notebook paper, no doubt. That sometimes happens anyway. Let me get this. Let me do a slide adjustment here. Two or three little squiggly notes, a phone number, an appointment, a reminder of something I need to do later or buy later at the grocery store. And then, once the information is no longer needed, the whole thing gets crumpled up and thrown into the trash can. I wonder if there's ever been anyone who has saved all of their Post-it notes. I mean, why would they? But even still, they could get in the Guinness Book of World Records or something. They'd have to have some way to prove it. But then, they have Post-it notes, so that's a paper trail, right? Okay. There's not a lot to say about Post-it notes. Countless articles have been written focusing on the fact that Post-it notes almost weren't invented at all. This is not one of those articles. There are so many things you can do with Post-it notes besides just leaving notes for yourself and others. Teachers use them for all kinds of creative projects. Moms use them on bulletin boards. Pinterest, though, has the scoop on using sticky notes for everything from making a wishing wall for the kids to pulling pranks. Post-its have been used to create mosaics and other art projects. That is actually kind of cool to see. I think there are some YouTube videos about that. What would life be like without Post-it notes? a waste basket full of wadded up notebook paper sheets. Of course, we'd all get more free throw practice in. You'd probably get more emails from me without the little sticky reminders. Back to basic stuff about Post-its, though. The advantage of the Post-it note is the little strip of adhesive on the back. The sticky aspect means it travels better. They can sometimes be found on my rear view mirror, my phone, in the front of a book, or on my wall calendar. Where's the oddest place that you've ever put a sticky note? Probably not as unusual as artist Rebecca Murtaugh from California, who covered her whole bedroom with $1,000 worth of sticky notes, color coding items in the room according to the estimated value of the objects. Wonder where I found that. 3M began selling Post-it notes with a low-tack, pressure-sensitive adhesive to allow the small notes to be easily attached and reposted without leaving the sticky behind. In the beginning, the notes were only available in yellow, but today they come in all kinds of colors, shapes, and sizes. As of 2019, there are at least 26 documented colors of Post-it notes. The Lennon Wall in Hong Kong is a message board created during the 2014 protests from a stretch of curved staircase in the central government complex. The wall is covered in multicolor Post-it notes with handwritten messages from supporters. Virtual Post-it notes are available. Evernote, Google Keep, and Microsoft OneNote are among the variations of this product. Have you ever wondered why the notes were first invented in the color yellow? No? Neither had I. You know, most people just accept that the notes are mostly yellow. The government offices I worked in only provided notes in the color yellow. So why yellow? The lab next door to the original Post-it team only had scrap yellow paper, so it stuck. Pun not intended. One writer makes the case for why we still need Post-it notes. She says, there's a reason 3M still sells around $1 billion worth of notes annually. She points to the research paper published on Harvard Business Review's website that concluded someone is more likely to comply with a request to do something when it's written on a Post-it note. That's interesting. I wonder if that works for teenagers. I always wondered about all the sticky notes from my supervisor. Now I totally get it. A more recent study done in 2005 says those initial results are still true today. The author of the findings suggests that people find sticky notes technically low impact, persuasive, and uniquely interesting. Although others have claimed to have thought of the Post-it note first, none stand out in my mind more clearly than the scene from the 1997 movie Romy and Michelle's High School Reunion. This fluffy little fun piece of film features Mira Sorvino and Lisa Kudrow, who decide to make a big splash at their high school reunion by dreaming up exciting but fake pasts for themselves in order to impress former classmates at their 10-year reunion. In one scene, Michelle, played by Lisa Kudrow, tells a glamorous group of ladies that she and Romy invented Post-it notes. A split second later, the camera pans to Romy, who is telling a classmate, and all Michelle did was say, well, what about making them yellow? Of course, they were called out for this fabrication, and the audience learns that Art Fry was the actual inventor. I didn't know it at the time. They didn't know it, and I didn't know it at that time either. You can even use sticky notes to create your own movie. Oh my goodness. There is a Giphy of someone flipping through a little pad of sticky notes, and there's drawings. And it looks like a little movie. Well, and that was the end of the. I never write the end, so sometimes if I add something at the end of a story, I don't realize till after I've gotten past the picture or some other image or something that that was actually the end of the story. Okay. Alrighty. Now, the very next story that I have in the list is called My Little Brother Ate Chicken Poop on a Dare, and he'd do it again. And actually, in my long form videos, you will see this story is a separate story all by itself. But there is a little bit of a backstory to that, and so I kind of wanted to explain that because I know some of my kids are going to blink twice when they see this because they know that I don't have any brothers. I have 4 sisters. And so I will say it was actually one of my little sisters that did this, and it was so gross at the time. I cannot tell you, but as a story, I know that it is kind of funny if you're just reading it, but living through it was a totally different thing. So, this is, and I actually published this for one of the Medium publications. Okay. My brother would do anything on a dare. Don't even suggest a possible dare because he considers it pure cowardice to not accept your dare. In fact, if you dared him to let an ant sting his arm, he'd let 2 of them sting him just so you wouldn't say he was cheating. Not only sting him, but smile grimly the entire time with that glare in his blue eyes. One weekend, my mom loaded all of us up and we headed down to visit my granny who lived in Caddo, Oklahoma. Grandma's house was always overflowing with aunts, uncles, and cousins, and my cousins Wayne and Danny lorded it over the rest of us, being the oldest. Grandma's house had, there was so much fun at Grandma's house. She had this little room built on the front next to the street that people could go in and look at all of the glassware that she had collected for the last 30-40 years. But anyway, it was always a fascinating trip to my grandma's. So it was Wayne and Danny's idea to taunt my brother JJ with a dare to eat some chicken poop out of Grandma's chicken pen. Grandma kept some old English game roosters, and they were almost as mean as she was. JJ yelled back at his older cousin and said that he wasn't afraid of eating the poop if Wayne thought he was big enough to get in the pen and scoop some up. Wayne's ears turned bright red as all of the 9 younger cousins hanging around turned their eyes toward him expectantly, watching for what he'd do next. Nobody ever taunted Cousin Wayne, and like any bully, he wasn't about to show a sliver of weakness. He marched over to the pen's gate, unlatched it, and stepped inside. The roosters were on the far side with the hens, but their heads popped up curiously. Like any trained creatures, they knew there was only one reason why a human stepped inside their pen, and that was food. Ergo, it must be feeding time. Cousin Wayne abruptly found himself the center of attention of 32 assorted hens and roosters, all doing chicken waddles at 10 miles per hour. Each one was determined to be first in line for the chicken feed they assumed would soon be scattered all around them. A bounty to partake of, except that Cousin Wayne was unaware of the plan. When he found himself surrounded by a flock of beaks and chicken feet, he took off running around the pen trying to find a way to escape. He had the presence of mind to understand that he must somehow scoop some poop before he exited, or else risk making a second foray into this madhouse. With chickens in hot pursuit of the human that was playing this unusual feeding game with them, and trying to ignore the cheering and hollering of all of us outside the pen, Wayne paused for 1 second, stuck his hand in a pile of chicken feathers and poop, and threw it over the fence. He then made a straight beeline for the gate and slammed it shut. He spent the next 5 minutes wiping his bare feet and hands on the grass and trying to clean out detritus from between his toes. In the meantime, JJ had sneaked off into Granny's kitchen and stolen a handful of white sugar from the canister. Fortunately, Grandma and the other adults were all gathered around the dining room table, drinking coffee and smoking and generally being too loud to hear sounds from a sneaky grandkid pilfering in the pantry. JJ was small enough to sidle into the pile of cousins as if he'd never left, and when Wayne found a stick to pick up the bit of poop to take it over to him, JJ calmly doused the pile in sugar and took a great big lick. Leaving it in his mouth, he opened up wide so we could all see the poop in there, as corroborating evidence that he had kept up his end of the dare. He swished it around for about 5 seconds. I gagged just a bit at that, and so did Ruthie and Connie, Aunt Margaret's 7-year-old twins. JJ then spit out the mix of sugar and poop, causing Wayne to howl, "No fair!" "You never said I had to swallow." JJ laughed at him, hands on his scrawny hips. I did get some comments on that. Let's see what other people had to say about my brother eating poop on a dare. Cassandra says, "I laughed reading your story. I found it to be hilarious and enjoyable. Thanks for helping me laugh tonight. I needed it." I said, "I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I wasn't sure if it would gross people out. Oh, the things that kids will do." And Lou said, "Oh my gosh, my mom used to tell me never drop your chewing gum in the chicken coop." Yeah. Okay. K.L. Simmons says, "I could barely finish the end. Whew, child. But it reminded me of the movie The Help as well. I won't spoil it for those who have yet to see it." Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, you won't get a spoiler from me either, but I do know why now. And I said, "Thank you. This was such a fun one to write. I took the memory of my grandma's house at Caddo and embellished like crazy." I really did. Although, I don't know if she'll ever read this one, but my sister was pretty gross that day. Pretty gross. And for my children out there, you should know that it was one of your aunts that did that. I don't even know if she remembers it that way because she was younger than me. But anyway, alrighty. The next article I wrote was another one sort of like Romy and Michelle's. Okay? And it was When a Movie is So Much More Than Just a Movie. Oscars, reviews, and why we watch. And I wrote this one on April the 6th of 2022. Been almost 3 years. Wow. Movies are the purest form of escape. Whether they be drama, romance, action, comedy, or any combination of the above. But everyone has their own idea of what constitutes a good movie. I don't know that I could give a decent film review. I don't know all the critics' buzzwords for one thing. I just know what I like. However, others are exceptional at expressing in detail what constitutes a good movie. One writer here, Kenneth Corey, gives his criteria and shares his opinions of the best movies of 2021. So I left a link to his article. Using his categories of art, dramatic catharsis, and resonance, Kenneth does a deep dive into each of the films he reviews. He defines his categories and talks about how each film rates in each one. In his article, he reviews the following movies: Censor, I'm Your Man, Juniper, The Night House, Parallel Mothers, Spencer, Summer of '85, Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy, Mass, Riders of Justice, Sun Children, Sweat, and The Worst Person in the World. You know, I don't think I've seen any of those movies. And of course, that was my next comment in the article. Should I be ashamed to admit that I have not seen a single one of those movies? To be fair, I have spent a large portion of my time in the past few months writing and reading here on Medium. When I take a break, it's usually to spend some quality time bonding with my son over Star Trek. The Golden Girls, 5 stars and 2 thumbs up, lull me to sleep every night. Nothing new or frightening there. And you know, I still do that with the Golden Girls. It will be the last thing that I turn on at night, and I'll usually fall asleep now within 5 to 10 minutes of the Golden Girls starting, as much as I want to see the episodes. Once each year, it's time to reward the actors who have given us their talents as they portray film characters we've come to love. Everyone has an opinion on who should have won the Oscar for Best Actor or Best Film of the Year. Carol St. Martin has written an excellent article on the Oscar season. Spoiler alert, don't read unless you have no opinions on who should have won. And her name of her article was 5 Alternative Best Picture Winners. Carol starts off by making a great point. The fact that Cary Grant and Alfred Hitchcock never won a competitive Oscar kind of says it all, really. That is still so hard for me to believe. Cary Grant never won an Oscar? Alfred Hitchcock never won an Oscar? She defines her criteria and warns you this is just for fun. So buckle in, you're in for a wild ride. Her alternative Best Picture winners might not be your picks, but she gives plenty of good reasons for the films she chooses. And I hope you enjoyed that article as much as I did. What would movies be without our favorite actors? Melissa Toldy admits that she prefers to watch movies knowing as little in advance as possible. The name of her article was Mainstream Actors in Offbeat Films. She says she doesn't even want to see the trailer. I kind of get that. Although I think of the trailer as just whetting my appetite for the story, still, there have been times when I've left the theater thinking that the trailer was the best part of the movie. And like Melissa, sometimes watching a movie because there's a certain actor in it is not the best way to find a great movie. I give you proof. I will watch pretty much everything with Keanu Reeves. Melissa says Hollywood is counting on repeat customers like me. She's probably right. She also talks about picking a movie because of the director. This doesn't happen so much with me. For a while, I did like M. Night Shyamalan's movies, mostly for the good kind of scary. Next is the age-old question, why do we watch what we watch? Devansh Kamdar begins his story by telling us, no matter how hard I try, I can't put my finger on the one true moment when I fell in love with cinema. Maybe it was my first viewing of No Country for Old Men, the opening scene of Hard Eight, or the Tears in Rain monologue from Blade Runner. In 2020, he found himself with too much time and not enough to do. He found escape in watching movies. My son and I spent evening hours binge watching sci-fi. A lot of us can relate. We can relate to too much time and not enough to do. He goes on to tell us that movies became his new ritual, his reward for enduring a difficult day, and then gives us a virtual tour into what movie escapism means to him personally. I loved the way he concluded. There are a lot of things in my life that aren't perfect right now, but when I take a seat in a movie theater or turn off the lights and switch on the TV at home, I become part of something infinitely bigger than myself. My only hope is that someday I can tell my own stories too. We're right there with you, Devansh. When you tell your stories, we'll be cheering you on. I do love sitting in a dark theater and watching a movie on that humongous screen. Setting aside my problems for a couple of hours while I get lost in a well-told story in surround sound is pretty close to perfection. We've had a couple of rough years. We could use a little escape now and then. So I hope you enjoyed that article, When a Movie is So Much More Than Just a Movie. Oh my goodness, it's probably been about a year since I've been to the movie theater. I can't even remember the last time. Wow. But we do watch a lot of movies on Hulu and Netflix, you know, on the much smaller screens. What was the last movie that you saw in the movie theater? Oh, I know a movie that I saw, and I don't know if it was Hulu or Paramount. I'm not sure. But a couple of days ago, I saw that Mr. Rogers movie, the one with Tom Hanks. And of course, I'd seen it when it was first advertised, when it was first out, but I didn't realize that it was actually a pretty good movie. I mean, I enjoy Tom Hanks. He's a good actor. But that movie, actually will, make you cry just a little bit. So, and that's all the spoiler that I'll give you, but it didn't even really talk that much about Mr. Rogers' background, but the way that it was told, it was a very touching story. Okay, my story that I wrote the day after that, on April 7th, I titled it, Starving Children in China Would Love Your Brussels Sprouts. And that's something my mother, probably your mother, has said at one point or another, is like, eat what's on your plate. There are still children who are starving that would love to get that food. And my answer after I turned about 10 or 11 was, why don't you just go ahead and mail it to them? Okay. What constitutes a delicious meal? Is it eating in your favorite restaurant? Is it the ambiance of your surroundings? These features can increase your satisfaction with a meal experience, but for most of us, it is all about the food. Whether it's comforting meatloaf, which is always a favorite of mine, a spicy taco, or Chinese egg rolls, you will find me ready to enjoy a food I've had many, many times before. One of the meals that we ate quite frequently when I was growing up consisted of pinto beans, fried potatoes, and cornbread. It is still on my top 5 favorite meals to eat at home. Why is it that there are some foods we never get tired of eating? According to the National Institute of Health, we have a virtually limitless palette of flavors the mouth can experience, having between 2,000 and 4,000 taste buds. These cells are renewed once a week. Amazing. But what tastes good and what is good for you are sometimes two very different things. Amanda, another author, another writer on Medium, reminds us, and I'm skipping her last name because it looks Egyptian maybe, and I'm afraid of butchering it. Anyway, she reminds us that it comes down to the basics. Eat mostly natural, plant-based foods, eat in moderation, and try to stay away from processed foods as much as possible. This isn't always easy to do, especially when that chocolate cake is calling my name at 2 a.m. Just kidding. If you knew me, you'd know that if I brought home a cake, it's not surviving the night. Which brings me to another point about food. I'm carrying around a few extra meals I need to get rid of. I know it. Everybody else around me knows it. And yet somehow we never talk about it that much. Thank you very much. And when it comes to dieting, there's never a shortage of people here on Medium to help you out with advice. Like this article by Kiati Jane called The Ideal Time to Eat Dinner If You Want to Lose Weight According to Science. My pesky pounds are sticking around because I've been doing dinner all wrong. According to her article, my body's ability to digest food and burn calories decreases as the night approaches. And to make it worse, I'm more likely to make poor dietary choices at night. I am. That applies to me. Wow, it's like she knows me. This also totally explains why I get heartburn every night. Well, nearly every night. Additionally, it explains the popularity of the 4:30 p.m. early bird special with the senior population. I think Kiati's plan to calculate my ideal time to eat dinner sounds sensible. It doesn't rule out eating that slice of chocolate cake as long as I eat it at the right time. I can live with that. Somewhere in China, according to my mother, is a child who would love to be eating the Brussels sprouts I just turned my nose up at. While my parents have saved a lot of money by rarely eating fast food, there were times when it seemed we were served a lot of beans and cornbread. I don't remember ever going hungry, but pizza and hamburgers were a couple of things I treated myself to when I finally moved away from home. Not enough food is definitely a problem among many countries around the globe. 10.5% of U.S. households experienced food insecurity in 2020 compared to 21% in Africa and 40% in China, according to a 2016 survey. Michelle Fox's article on food shortage points out specific tactics that people use to obtain food and nutrition when forced because of circumstances. And the name of her article was How People Survive Food Shortages. It says, you've seen the news, and if you're anything like me, you've been wondering what happens when there are food shortages. Okay. She says people have been known to survive on very little, but it takes its toll on the body. Foraging becomes very important to supplement whatever canned goods are available, and she recounts stories of how people shared or bartered or hoarded to survive in war-torn Berlin at the end of World War II. This is such a timely article and made me grateful for what I have. It still does. Even when I may only have a sandwich and fresh water. Okay. Can you find food recipes from writers here on Medium? You know the answer is yes. Even if it's something as simple as Jan Sebastian's peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which she wrote an article about. Or pasta gravy from Michelle Baumgardner. Or Angie Den's recipe for strawberry tarts. That looks pretty good too. Medium has you covered with all kinds of recipes for delicious food, because whether you have enough or don't, or whether your taste buds are screaming for variety, it really is all about the food. Okay, so you know my favorite meal is meatloaf. What's yours? You will also find that, oh no, I haven't done a long form video on that one yet. I may end up doing some of these as individual stories on long form, just so that someone they can pick and choose then what they want to listen to or what they want to watch. Okay, I think maybe a couple of more stories. Okay, so the very next one is an article about Medium itself. Now, a lot of, I say a lot of, maybe 10% of writers on Medium um, enjoy uh, writing and frequently write articles on the about the Medium platform itself, because there are a lot of features on Medium, such as, giving 50 claps or giving one. I mean, that has been debated by just about everybody. Then you can comment. Some people talk about, when your comments are too long. Um, some people talk about highlighting. Some people complain about people highlighting their articles. Um, and so I've done my share of writing about the different features of Medium as well. And this one is on clapping. And the name of it was, "Is giving 5 claps for my article thoughtless or an insult?" Now, Medium allows you to give up to 50 claps, and it hasn't always counted as a factor in how much a writer will get paid, but it is at this current time. It is, they will factor in the amount of claps and comments, all the engagement, all the little engagement metrics. They will factor those in when it comes to how much you get paid for writing your story. And so, and at the time, it wasn't such a big deal, but it could be now, especially when it counts for getting extra pay in your monthly paycheck. Okay, it takes considerable time and effort to keep that finger on the clap button until you've given the 50 full claps. 6.3 seconds as a matter of record. Consider the alternative. If it doesn't matter to the algorithm, then it's really just a matter of choice for the reader when it comes to giving claps. Giving no claps can mean you didn't have the time to clap and needed to move on, or you really didn't like it and feel like even giving 1 clap would be encouraging people to keep writing total nonsense. Giving between 1 and 10 claps could mean you only liked it just a little bit, or it could mean you could only spare 2 seconds to hold down the button, and then however many claps the writer received is just random. Or it could be laziness on the reader's part, an indication that the time and effort you spent creating, researching, editing, and publishing the piece is simply not worth rewarding by clapping in a thoughtful way. What is the community saying about clapping? Alex Henninger points out that clapping on this platform is a slightly controversial project. I think this is a carryover from pre-2022 Medium, where the number of claps was directly related to how much a story earned. So apparently, before 2022, they were also used in the metrics for earnings, and now they've gone back to that. He goes on to admit that he does have a system to clap different amounts based on how he enjoyed an article, but concludes that clapping costs nothing to show appreciation and gratitude for the writer's work. And to me, I've never really used the system. If I read an article, I will try to read it all the way through to the end, and then I will try to leave a full 50 claps. There have been a few times, but very, very rare. Because like he said, it doesn't cost you anything to give somebody the full 50 claps. October J points out that clapping is one way of showing appreciation. She goes into detail about her award system for giving specific numbers of claps from 1 to 50. She does admit that it might sound kind of nuts, but it's better than no clapping. She states at the end that her piece is satire. Maybe. But the thing about it is that I think a lot of people will overthink that. Because, I mean, yes, you could have a system for giving just a few claps, or you could have, just go ahead and do all 50, and then anywhere in between. But then that means you have to spend time thinking, okay, is this a 1 to 10 kind of article? Or do I give them 20 this time? Did I halfway like it, so I'll give them 25? It's just, to me, that's just overthinking it. Just go ahead and push down on claps until you reach 50 and then move on to the next article. Another writer has his own award system, similar to October's. Bigga P will give claps if your title catches his attention, a few more for a fantastic image, and a few more if he determines what you've written is not clickbait. If you give him an epiphany, he will give up to 40 claps and highlight. To get the full 50, your work has to have that magic pixie dust. I'm not here to edit each story I read. I don't want to spend time critiquing to determine the specific number of claps I judge an article deserves. No wonder you're not getting enough reading done. Don't overthink this, folks. If you take the time to read someone's article, why not just give them the full 50 claps? Okay, I admit I've read some stories, and for whatever reason I felt like I honestly could not clap for it. Occasionally it's going to happen. But 99% of the time when I read, I don't spend time thinking about how many claps. I just give them the full 50 and move on. And I especially don't understand giving just one clap. I mean, yes, it takes probably less than a split second, but even still. Terry L. Cooper made an excellent point in one comment about people who don't understand the clap feature. There are some on the platform who think one clap is the same as a thumbs up or a like, which is not the case. They could have loved your story, but not knowing any better, they gave it a single clap. Another writer who doesn't understand the one clap thinking is Christina Communion. I may be saying her name wrong. Although she doesn't think of herself as a real writer, she has been known to publish occasionally and begs someone to explain why some readers only give one clap. Okay, so if any of you, I do have candles going behind me, so if any of y'all notice that before I do, that something's caught on fire or my curtains are going up, would you please, I don't know, give me a holler or something, I'm not sure. Anyway, wave your hands, maybe I'll see it. Okay. Although she doesn't think of herself as a real writer, she's been known to publish occasionally and begs someone to explain why some readers only give one clap. And the name of her article was, Who Gives It a One Clap Clap? I love the possible choices. Was it out of courtesy, or that thing that starts with P and ends in ITY? Did you mean to encourage me to work harder, or did you mean to discourage me from ever trying again? Were you trying to tick an imaginary moral box? Michael Berg, MD, suggests that giving one clap may be a noob or rookie mistake in need of correction, and that happens a lot. New writers on the platform, they don't understand it, so they just do whatever. I enjoyed his recommendation that the new one-clapper crop is in need of schooling or a timeout or a spanking. He got lots of response from his readers. Rain Lore begged, "Oh please, gods of writing, make the newbies and others read this. We are not bleeding teachers grading papers. We are desperate writers looking for love and accolades. We are needy people. Clap for goodness." Sally Pragg agreed, "Holy clap, that should do the trick. Thank you for standing up for all who have been reduced to measuring our worth by our claps. Lots of claps for you, Michael." P.J. Jackelman tells us, "I admit to feeling judged and left wanting after less than 50, and have come to feel less than 50 is a slap, not a clap. But then I also admit to be a hypersensitive buttercup. Good article. And Toya Qual Burnett said it best. The more I think about it, we need a 50 claps club for people who understand claps are not a grading system. We're not in class. Go ahead, uplift your fellow writer by giving him 1 to 30 claps. A D- at best. It is not that serious, people. Be generous. Be kind. We're all in this together. If the writing doesn't live up to your expectations, by all means, don't keep reading and don't clap at all. Keep it moving. One writer who gives 50 claps, or none, is Joanne Ryan. Her reasoning is similar to mine. It's about supporting other writers, not judging. One of her article's readers, Au Naturel, commented, "Not clapping a lot is similar in meaning to giving a minuscule tip. It is actually more insulting than no tip at all." Another reader, Jill, agrees, "We aren't grading papers, just showing support to our fellow writers." In another article she wrote on clapping, one of her readers, Esther George, makes this point. "The other thing I can't wrap my head around is the one clap policy. I mean, how much are they paying per clap? Maybe they can't afford it. I don't know." Charlie Coop explains different types of claps and tells us that among the reasons he will give the Citizen Kane clap is that the writer is clearly working earnestly on finding their unique writing voice, and I would be a monster not to support that. That's a slow clap, people, not a no clap. And you know, that article actually, I told you a lot of people write about the different features on Medium, but that one got 189 comments. So there were a lot of people that felt pretty strongly about clapping or the lack of clapping. Lori said, "I've stopped looking at how many claps I get. I suggest this attitude for all. I am grateful for being able to easily publish on Medium and to get some eyes on my work. That's all that matters." It sounds like Lori is maybe a seasoned writer who has developed a little bit of a thicker skin, because a lot of new writers are very sensitive about claps and comments and all those other vanity metrics. It means a lot to them. And Adam says, "Honestly, I wish the system was like others. Either clap once, like a thumbs up, or don't. Then all this hand wringing about how many claps each person gives would be dispensed with on both sides. Because if you're going to clap 50 times for everything, and I understand why this would be the way to go, then 50 is the same as 1 anyway." And that's a really good point. 50 would be the same as 1. But still, if you leave just 1, when people know that they could get 50, then someone's going to feel slighted. Rui Alva says, "1 clap or 50 claps equals 1 fan. It's all the same in AI language. I'd rather get 1 clap from 10 fans than 50 claps from 1. And that is a really good point, too. That is a really good point. But then, how much better would it be, Rui, if you got 10 fans giving you 50 claps, which would be 500 claps? That would be even better." Alrighty, so let's do one last story, I think. And maybe there'll be something with a backstory. Okay. Probably not. Oh, you know what? I'm going to skip the one on Picasso and go to the one after that that was published on April the 9th, 2022, because apparently I was back into car camping at the time. And so I wrote an article about it called Don't Pay for Expensive Vacations Anymore, which I never paid for expensive vacations anyway. But um, you can save a lot of money by sleeping in your car if you've planned for it. About 3 years ago, I started watching Bob Wells' YouTube videos about van camping and those who choose to live a nomadic lifestyle. I was still working full time, but dreaming about retiring and traveling, and this seemed like the perfect solution. My son, and that would be my younger son, Jonathan, bought lumber and supplies, pulled out some of my seating in my 2013 Dodge Caravan, and built a bed platform for me. I used the space under the frame for storage and packed it full of stuff I thought I would need while I was off gallivanting in the woods, in the mountains, or by the ocean. I planned my first weekend trip about 4 hours away from my home and just fell in love with the solitude. And actually, there is another article there's a video in my long form about camping on Wahoo Bay, and that was this same weekend. I spent 2 days beside a quiet section of Fort Gibson Lake in Oklahoma, listening to the water lap against the shore and watching the birds. Heavenly. That trip was enough to convince me that I could love living this kind of lifestyle. To achieve that goal, I needed to get in a better position financially, which meant I had to keep working a little while and pay off a few more debts. My oldest son helped me out when he gifted me some money out of the blue, and it was just enough to pay off the Dodge. Last September, I stopped working and took my first cross-country trip to Washington State. I parked in rest areas and truck stops overnight and loved every minute of it. But I discovered during that trip that half of the stuff I'd packed I never even used or looked at. I'd listened to enough interviews on Bob's channel that warned against packing too heavy, and finally I understood. You just don't need as much as you think you will. I was so excited to find so many other riders who enjoy camping, hiking, and backpacking, and who write about their adventures and love of traveling, so that some of us can live vicariously through them until we can make adventures of our own. Whether you prefer camping as a solitary experience or enjoy being surrounded by other campers, there's a campground out there just for you. In her article about campground life, Kathy Wells McComber describes a campground scene that will make you long to be right there in the middle of all the fun, laughter, and camaraderie. And I put a link to her story, but of course, since I don't have any copyrights to anybody else's story, all I can do is tell you that those stories are out there if you want to go hunt them down. Backroad Packers is another writer, or maybe a husband and wife team, I'm not sure, who discuss camping resources, where to camp for free, the pros and cons of free camping, what basic supplies you'll need when you go camping, and recommendations on some of their favorite camping spots. I especially enjoy the interactive maps for the free BLM and NF's camping sites they included. There are several apps out there that you can get if you want to find places to park and to sleep overnight. Backpacking is true camping, not the van camping that I do. John Joseph talks about traveling on foot with your supplies in a pack you carry. He rhapsodizes over nature's serenity and views so incredible they look like screensavers. I've got one of my own photos on a lake in Washington State. Anyway, it's as my computer desktop right now. What resonated with me with this other writer is his description of a feeling that when you're out in nature, you dream of being back in your comfy bed. But when you're safe at home, you crave to be out in nature once more. And that is so true for me too. I found that when I'm here at home in my sticks and bricks, that I think about the adventures of being out on the road, and I'm like, but I'm so comfortable right here. Why would I want to be out there? Because sometimes it gets too cold and sometimes it gets too hot, and then you're out there, and sometimes and the idea of it is a little scary. But then when I'm actually out there, and I'm cozy in my van, and I've got everything there that I need, I'm like, why would I want to be cooped up all the time in my house? This is so much more fun. I can go places and see things. So I totally understand, that mindset that, the where you are right now influences how you see other things, other ways of living. What's really strange for me to think about is the fact that behind this screen, you live a completely different life than I do. And this may be the only overlap that we have. And that there are millions and millions of people that are out there living lives that I don't understand or can't comprehend, because this is what we're used to. We get in our little ruts and we're used to this. Another writer advises you to work with what you've got. This is true van camping. He says, don't wait thinking that you need an expensive setup. You're missing out on van camping travel trips, because really everything you need is probably in your house right now. And that is so true. I pack too much, and I know you actually don't need nearly the amount of stuff that you think you do. Tacoma Traveler Chronicles published an article similar to John Joseph's above. Many campers who write about their experiences talk about the urge to get out in nature again, to get on the road once more. It's a longing that can only be satisfied by packing up your vehicle and backing down the driveway. And the name of his article was This Insatiable Restlessness. Reading these wonderful articles on camping reminds me of how I felt when I first decided this is what I want to do: travel and see new places, meet new people, and get out of my bubble. It's been a long, cold winter. And who knows, by the time this winter is over, I may be feeling the exact same way, that need to get away. And I guess that's cabin fever, maybe. And I ended the article by saying, it's time to get out there and explore, to make some adventures and memories. So if you will excuse me for just one moment, I am going to go get something else to drink, and I will be right back. Alrighty, so we are back. We are back, and I know that I had said that that was just one more story, but I haven't been doing a live stream for I think it's been about a week. And one of the main reasons I wanted to do the live streams, well, not just the live streams, but this project, I wanted to read my own stories that I've written in my own words, because this may be the only way that my family or friends will be able to know what I've written, because unless they have access to Medium or know that I've written on Medium, they have no idea that I've written all of these articles and all of these stories. And so I wanted them to be able to see, to enjoy what I've produced out of my imagination, and maybe, just maybe, encourage some of them to realize that they could do the same thing. I know that my mother used to write stories. I would, every once in a while, I would come across a notebook where she had been writing out a story, and her handwriting was a little hard to read, but she obviously felt that writing this story down was important to her. But we've lost all of that. We don't have any of her notebooks. She never recorded anything that she wrote. I don't even know that she talked about her writing. But I know that she had that talent, that she enjoyed. That was something she enjoyed doing. And I'm wondering maybe if she got that from one of her parents. I don't think my dad was interested in writing, so I'm pretty sure I got that. If it's even genetic, then I would have gotten that from her. I know that stories were important to me. I know that reading was important, and I know that reading was important to her. But I don't know whether either one of her parents were. And now it's a conversation we won't be able to have. So I think that by doing this, that by leaving this record for my family, that it's something that maybe can bring them joy when they see, oh look, she wrote this funny story, or she wrote this serious article. It can help them to see that there are possibilities, that that you may have talents that you didn't realize. So if you are my children and you are watching this, then I want you to think about what talents, or even if it's a hobby that you once enjoyed, what talents you might have or you might nurture that other people could get enjoyment out of as well. All right, so I will do one more story because I really wanted a little bit of I wanted to get through a lot of my stories. Of course, none of us know exactly, how long we're going to be here, and it's not like I'm dying or anything, but I have 700 stories to get through, and so I kind of wanted to be able to record all of those. And then there's so much that I've written that there are backstories, and like what was going on in my life at the time, or memories from my childhood that that I think that my kids would enjoy as well. I know that since I've done a lot of genealogy research for my family, that oftentimes I will find some information about a relative and it'll make me curious about them. And of course, there's no book, there's nothing that I can go read or go ask. I don't think I have any relatives now that are older than me. I don't think so. I think my mother might have an aunt out in California who is, but even still, she's got to be in her 90s. But anyway, so there's nobody else that I can ask. And so by leaving all of these little details, all of these little stories, and not just what I've read, but the things that they remind me of and that they call back to mind, that my descendants, if you will get a kick out of being able to see this later on. At least I hope you are. And if you're watching in the year 2050, I hope that it's nearly as exciting as my imagination thinks. Alrighty, so after that one was, I could do. Okay, let me go ahead and do the Pablo Picasso one, just so that I can have a clear starting point the next time. Okay, Pablo Picasso, child prodigy, prolific painter, and co-founder of Cubism. On April the 8th, 1973, at age 91, Pablo Picasso, perhaps the most influential artist of the 20th century, died at Mougins, France. I don't know French, so I'm hoping that I'm saying that correctly. Picasso had made a name for himself in the art world before the age of 50. He was an innovator and, along with Georges Braque, co-founded Cubism. And Cubism is not my favorite form of art, but I can see where people would think that it was interesting. During his lifetime, Picasso created over 20,000 paintings, drawings, sculptures, ceramics, and other items such as costumes and theater sets. He was born in Spain in 1881 but lived most of his adult life in France. His full name was Pablo Diego José Francisco de Paula Juan Nepomuceno María de los Remedios Cipriano de la Santísima Trinidad Martyr Patricio Cleto Ruiz y Picasso. I would abbreviate my name too if it were that long. I keep remembering my mother saying my full name whenever I got into trouble. I feel for Pablo's mama, Maria. Pablo's father, Don Jose Ruiz, was also a painter and a professor and encouraged his son's talent from a very early age. At the age of 14, Pablo painted Portrait of Aunt Pepa. This was the same year his little sister Conchita died of diphtheria. The Aunt Pepa portrait was a striking depiction that has been referred to as one of the best portraits in Spanish history. And at age 16, Picasso created his award-winning Science and Charity. One quote from Pablo Picasso is, "Every act of creation is first of all an act of destruction." That is an interesting observation. Like every artist, Picasso's work was influenced by his life and experiences. When he was 20, he was poor and living with friends in Paris. His paintings had themes of malnutrition and prostitution and were done primarily in shades of blue and blue-green. A close friend, Carlos Casagemas, committed suicide, and Picasso painted several posthumous portraits of him. This blue period lasted from 1901 to 1904. In 1904, Picasso began to meet with some artistic success. He met a bohemian artist and fell in love, and his paintings were more cheerful and used warmer hues. The works he completed between 1904 and 1906 were referred to as his Rose period. And another quote that I used from Pablo Picasso is, "Art is a lie that makes us realize the truth." His first masterpiece, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, was influenced by African elements and was considered one of the most innovative paintings in modern art history. His Guernica was a surrealist work depicting anti-war sentiment against fascism. In 1911, he was detained by the police when the Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre. The real culprit, a former security guard, was arrested a short time after. In 1947, Pablo made a public statement that he was for communism. He explained that communism was designed to help the poor people, and having been poor in his childhood, it seemed logical to him that the government should be for those who suffered from poverty. However, his 1953 portrait of Joseph Stalin caused such an uproar in the Communist Party that the Soviet government banished his works. It seemed that communism did not like him. Over 1,000 pieces of Picasso's works have been listed as lost, stolen, or disputed. Now that you know what some of his work looks like, you might just be fortunate enough to discover a real Picasso in your lifetime. In his later years, Picasso also began to write poetry, completing over 300 poems. In 1973, Paul McCartney wrote a song about Picasso's last words, "Drink to Me," that Picasso uttered while at a dinner party in Mougins. Pablo Picasso is called the father of modern art, and no one else has come close to the same level of fame or versatility that he achieved in the art world. Although the Met has some of Picasso's work on display, the best museums to enjoy some of his finest works are Museu Picasso in Barcelona, Spain, the Museum Sammlung Rosengart in Lucerne, Switzerland, and the Musée Picasso in Antibes, France. On this day in 1973, the world lost one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. Remembering Pablo Picasso today. Okay, that was one of the articles that I wrote because it was like what happened in history on this day. And that was April the 8th of 2022. So we are at the point where, oh my goodness. So the very next article is April 10th is Encourage a Young Writer Day, and that was April 9, 2022. So I have still got 2 years worth of articles and stories to get through. And let me see, coming up really soon are a couple more of my historical fiction where I take something, an account from history, and see it from a particular person's point of view. So I'm looking forward to those. Okay, so, and I need to make a note of that so I'll know where to start next time. Wow, there's still so much to get through, and I don't know. Oh my goodness, it's probably going to take me months to get through. Well, let me see. If I have 710 articles, well, and I've written since then too. Let me see. I could get through them all in 7 weeks if I could read 100 articles a week. I wonder if that's doable. No, my voice probably wouldn't hold up. I think I need to keep it at about probably around 5 and 6 articles per live stream, because that's probably, like, I think I've read, what have we read today? Maybe 6 or 7. And I can tell already that my throat is a little tight. So, but I really do need to get through all of this. I'm trying to do this all for you kiddos. So that, because otherwise it'll feel like, well, we don't know what else she could have written. And then, wouldn't it be nice if one of you would, my kiddos, of course, would compile all of this and put it into one book, and then you would have those to read as well. Not that they would take the place of your favorite fairy tales that you tell to your kids at bedtime or anything like that, but just like, okay, let's read something that Granny wrote. Yeah. And then they'd be like, oh yeah, my grandma wrote that story. Really? Let's turn it into a movie. I can dream big. Alrighty, so I know I've been on here for a while, and I think I'm starting to get sleepy too. But it happens to the best of us, I guess. Anyway, and here I am doodling to try to keep myself awake. Okay, alrighty, that's enough of that. Okay, I'm going to try to do this every afternoon. I just don't know that I'm going to be able to do it on the weekends as well. So, hopefully I can be on here again Monday afternoon, where I will once again be reading stories. And then, of course, if you're watching this at some point in the future, you're watching the playback because you weren't actually able to be right here with me, then it doesn't matter to you, because that I won't be here again until Monday, because you'll be watching it whatever day of the week that you want to. And then if you like to hear my stories, then maybe you'll check out the long form versions, or just turn on my playback for my live streams and just listen to them as you're falling to sleep, because I know I have that kind of voice. People have told me I have the kind of voice that they can fall asleep to. It puts them to sleep. So take that however you want to. Anyway, I do know that I do tend to get a little monotonous after a while. So that is it for today. That's all for now. And remember, the best stories are yet to come. Bye. If I can figure out how to turn this off.